Is dating hard? That's a really fun question to think about and answer. I believe that dating intentionally is not hard at all, or certainly not as hard as a lot of people think that it is. I think what people find hard is that they don't get the results that they want. So they think that dating doesn't work. So today I wanted to make a video based on the conversation that we had when I went live earlier on dating intentionally, or in this case, dating from a tantric perspective. So, spiritual perspective that we have to include, featuring Merlin, who's very needy. So, I can't put him down right now. But um, the idea of tantra means woven or to weave together. So, it's to see another person truly as they are, deeper than their physical, let's say, credentials or how they look on paper, for example. So we're going to break this down. And this might be like part one, and we might do a part two and include some maybe like suggestions or exercises that you could try. So I want to go over what we discussed, which I found very interesting. So I'll do this one first, and then we're going to do a breakdown of this book, Outdated by Pastor J.P. Pokluda, just called JP, Jonathan Pokluda. And thank you, Jenna, for gifting it to me for my birthday. She says great things about him, so I like him, so I'm very excited to get into it. So we'll do like this perspective and maybe like his perspective. Obviously, he's Christian, but any perspective. But clearly, something's not working. So let's find out what it is. So let's think about dating from a tantric perspective. So when I say tantra, a lot of the times in the Western, mind, this is something that's like very different or something that's hyper sexualized. It's not that at all. It's to have genuine connection with people. It's to genuinely authentically connect with them. All right, removing and reducing, minimizing the egoic tendencies. So let's just start there. The first thing is, a lot of people, they want a relationship, but they don't really know what they want. Like, they don't know what it looks like. They don't know what that person looks like to them. But if you don't know what that looks like, oftentimes they'll say, 6'5" millionaire, or, the guy will say 5'2", 80 pounds or something. It's like, look past that. Look at how it feels, how that relationship feels, So if you can't pinpoint exact behaviors, for whatever reason, maybe you just had bad experiences or didn't have a relationship before, then consider feeling security. It's stable, it's happy, it's adventurous. You can really free your heart when you're secure with another person. So it feels that way. It feels exciting. It feels like you're considered. Look for these emotional trigger words that make you feel very good. And then think about the actual dating process. So, one thing that I always found really, really fascinating was how people would complain about dinner dates, which I thought, what's the problem? Like, we went on those when I was in high school. That was like normal when I was 17. It's just as relevant now. But there's a huge emphasis on doing things very quickly and expeditiously. Okay, expedience is just taken over the realm of whimsy and romance. And I made a video last year around this time about dating is supposed to be fun. Like, people aren't having fun anymore when they're dating. They always want something from it, right? Which, I mean, the end goal is, if you want a relationship, you get a relationship. But in the meantime, not to be so rigid, like an executioner. It's like this, like there's this social like guillotine that just comes down on the whole idea if you don't immediately pick up what you want from that individual. It's a bit hasty, it's a little bit immature, it's not a vibe. So think about it like this. Let's say you know what you want and you go on a date. And I know a lot of the times people will say, well, I want a coffee date because it's really good and fast. So if it doesn't work out, then I just get to leave. You can leave any date. This is the first thing I would say. So there isn't a problem with the actual date. It's a lack of discernment or filtration. I said this many times. I have never had a bad date. That's because I'm flexible. I can get along with anyone. You have to have a level of decorum and social intelligence to sit through conversation. That doesn't mean that you're automatically robbed of a feeling of fun. It's not it at all. But you have to screen people. Okay, so if you meet on an app, for example, you should definitely schedule in like a 5-minute phone call before you go and meet that person in person. You want to see if there's like a vibe or a buzz. Okay, you should hear each other's voices, because like we're mammals, and that just does something. When you talk to someone, you can like pick up what they're like. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think like we're adults, so you should be able to sit through a meal, even if you don't want to marry that person. I know people are going to say, but it's a waste of time. Well, once you leave your house, you can argue that anything is a waste of time, but you've got to give it a genuine try, like you never know. You can make a friend out of that person. They could be a business partner one day. I don't know what, okay, but it's possible. Just keep an open mind and keep a level of maturity that you would want to be granted the same courtesy and graciousness if you were into someone and they weren't into you or whatever. It's not even about like it's harder for women or men. It's just like a general rule of life. Just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so that's the first thing. You've got to be able to actually go and be intentional on that date. So, a big part of the spiritual outlook on how we meet people is not really an intellectual one. Obviously, it's a spiritual one. And that is that there's no such thing as wrong place, or time or person, none of that. Okay, even a bad date has something to teach you and show you. And actually, I would argue that the negative experiences are far more useful or necessary than the positive ones. Success is easy, it's golden, but you really have to kind of stretch yourself internally to learn what it is that you want and really refine it. It can be quite a painful aspect of inner alchemy, but it's very, very useful. So, learning to go on dates with and pointing out these are things I don't prefer as much as these are things that I do prefer is very, very clarifying and really, really powerful. So don't, begrudge those days and don't be so hard on yourself. Which brings me to the second point. So one is actually know what you want and know how to date. A lot of people date like they're in a rush or they're like angry that they haven't gotten what they wanted. So the second thing, speaking of that, is it's not transactional in that way. Okay, so unfortunately, we do hear, a lot of the times it comes from one of the genders where they're like, well, I paid for this, so I was expecting that. It doesn't work like that because love is not transactional. Love is supposed to be deep and unconditional. Okay, yes, there's a level of reciprocity, but it's not like tit for tat, and that's just exhausting. And I had that one video do well where I said like being cheap in your spirit is just like a disease. It is like you're cheap with love, you're cheap with time, if you're cheap with money. It's the truth. If you are very giving to people of your time, like you respond quickly, you make time for them, you think of them, you buy them birthday presents, like it shows that you care and that you actually have something to give. So if you can't even give some of your time and like actual effort to invest in a date, you're either going on too many dates and again that means your filter is broken, or you're just, you're not on the level of what it is to like be in a very deep relationship, which is fine. Just like fall back a little bit and read about it and then come back when you're ready. So that's the thing, is not to look at things as so transactionally, like, well, I've gone out with you, whatever, 3 to 5 times. Now we have to make out in my car and then we're going to go back to mine and you know exactly why. Like, that's what? Like, no, just let people be what they are, when they are, where they are, which is the next thing. As you're sitting at a date, this is the third point, okay? Look at that person as just a spiritual being. They're someone's child, no matter how old they are. So, on some level, we're all a little bit babies, okay? Like we're babies, and that's the truth. Like some part of us never fully forms, and that's okay. So just look at them as a tender person, and you're sitting across from this soul that you vetted properly, and they just want to be loved. Everybody just wants to be loved. It's not even a human need. It's the need of all existence. Existence not only loves you, it's madly in love with you, and that's a natural thing. It's a default setting of most people, unless they have like some sort of like deep sociopathic behavior disorder. But it's to love and to be loved, truly, genuinely, not to be seen. So this leads to the fourth point. When you soften and you kind of like open up and you think that person's doing their best, perhaps they're a little bit clueless as to what I'm about and they're not perfect for me. That's okay. Like just acknowledge their humanity, and their heart, their poor little heart, that's not poor, but their heart, a little heart that's out there looking and trying their best. I think that's really like noble and admirable. And then that brings me to the next part, which is this idea of criticism. So oftentimes, we I think we glorify a little too much or sensationalize like things that go wrong or bad dates, like, oh, and then he did this, but then she said that. Or like, you see it on Reddit, what's the worst thing that's happening on a date? And growing up, like those like Cosmo Teen or whatever magazines, they had a lot of these little sections of like weird things that have happened on a date. Girl will like get drunk and throw up on someone. She's like, I was so embarrassed. Or like this guy had an allergic reaction. We called an ambulance. It's like, his life was threatened by anaphylactic shock. I don't think there's anything embarrassing about that. Like, Like, why are we sensationalizing things that go south? I don't get it. I don't think it's funny. I don't think it's quirky. I don't think it's cute. Not to be or not mindful, etc. Okay. So, the reason for that, when you start looking at people like spiritually who just want love, it actually opens you up a lot more. And the reason is, when I don't know where it is, like, but I live in the West, so obviously I sound this way. When a lot of the time people go on a date, they'll be like, he picked me up and, like their car looked like this, or they didn't offer to do that, or she said this and he said that, and they wore these shoes, they didn't know about like my favorite sports team or something. They're looking at this very superficial exterior and criticizing it. And then what happens is then you might not notice it, but that's ultimately your operating system. When you look at like, where do you live, who do you live with, what do you make, da da da, da, all that stuff. Okay, but we've talked about extensively here the importance of material provision, but the point is, when you do it to another and you're very cutthroat and you don't just allow them to be a human heart that's like looking for companionship, like a playmate, like ultimately you want a playmate, you want someone to have fun with, a kindred spirit, a true soul. You do it to yourself, because what you'll do is, let's say, like, I'm a woman, so let's say I'm sitting there, I'm looking, and I'm like, I don't like his shoes, he's threatened by my ambition, he wouldn't support me because he's jealous of me, he doesn't know what kind of wine that is, he mispronounced that on the menu. Okay, let's just use that as an example. What you ultimately start to do is, as you're driving home, now you'll start thinking and punishing yourself, well, I ended up on a date with someone I don't prefer, and what does that say about me? So I'm not skinny enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm too this, I'm too that. Maybe I should have done keto. Maybe I should have done the carnivore diet. That girl has clearer skin, that girl is more tan, that girl is thinner, that girl is this, that girl is that. So what you do is you subconsciously reflect those criticisms on yourself, and you'll think, oh, if I do these external things perfectly, then I'll be worthy of love. And that's just not accurate. You're worthy of love because you live and breathe, because God is perfect love. You're an aspect of God. He made you. You wouldn't be here if you weren't worthy of loving and being loved. And that's the truth. Okay, so once you just hear those little principles and you kind of practice them, everything gets a lot easier, I'll say. But then we can take it a little bit farther and say, what you actually want is really important. And even more than that, I would say, is the order in which you do things. So this is an interesting perspective, because in more traditional and older cultures like Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, well, I'm really familiar, obviously, with the style of astrology that I practice. So like Eastern cultures, the idea of arranged marriages or marrying a little bit younger, let's say, or that there is this need to marry, we'll say, okay? And it you just look for other marriage-minded people and you figure it out as you go along. So like if you want a partner, then you date to marry, which means you don't really date, you court. You go on dates, but you're courting. So then through that courtship, you find if your values are compatible, etc. And then you get married, however much time later. And then you enjoy that marriage, because now you feel secure that when you're looking for that person, they're focused on you, and so you're equally invested in them. So it frees you up. It sets your heart free. You're not truly free without commitment, right? Like, think about it like financially. Unless and until you have a stable source of employment, you're not really secure. And you can't have fun if you don't feel safe, that you know where your next meal is coming from, or that you have a place to sleep. Speaking of which, I have to check on him. He's there, okay? And so that being said, it's backwards. I can't even call it backwards. It just goes about the other way where I live in the West, which is usually you date for like years, then you're engaged for a year or two, and then you might get married, right? So we have this way of sort of looking at it like, if I'm good enough, that man will propose to that woman. And if he's good enough, she will accept him. So it's all about proving yourself or proving your worth instead of working toward and actively building your partnership, which, to me just honestly sounds like a time drain and a huge energy drain. So I've never ever liked that. I've preferred more like conservative and traditional cultures as a woman in that regard. It just feels a lot safer. So whichever path you choose, it doesn't actually matter, but just know that you're not there to like earn love or prove your worthiness. That's not it, you know? So honestly, truthfully, there is a lot of truth in those things that if someone actually people know very quickly, I will say people know very, very quickly if they're interested in someone long term. Secondly, if their values are in alignment, like if you're a marriage minded person, if you're like a partnership person, you know, we discussed earlier on the call or the live, like the difference between being a relationally intelligent individual and someone that is just literate in those things, but they don't believe those things. They only learn to mimic those things so that they can get with women or men or play the field or something, but their true heart's desire isn't really in it. And you have to be able to discern the two depending on what you're looking for, right? So it's no judgment. You can have anything you want. But if you're wanting this category versus that category, it's a different approach. So obviously knowing that if you want to have a stable long-term partnership, that you need to get with like-minded people, and it is an inside job. Okay, so the spiritual perspective, it's all an inside job. It doesn't really matter if you meet on an app. It doesn't really matter if you meet at a bar. And people like, you don't go to the clubs to meet people, you don't go to, those are just silly stereotypes. Like, of course, like, I don't know, every generation's different, but in my generation, like, Tinder actually came out, like, for the first time. I know people married off of there, like, literally married. I know people who got, you know, met at nightclubs and got married. It doesn't matter. Like, it depends what kind of person you are, right? So, the point is, then it's an inside job. So, how do you actually meet these people? Well, it's using the advice given at the start of this video, which is you have got to start looking at people as people who are here for a loving experience and going from there. So basically, you know, the next time you go out or talk to someone, you're trying to gauge a feeling rather than intellectually compartmentalize, like they belong in this box or they belong in that box. And what that does is it removes that judgment and it removes that pressure, and not just off of them, you know, because I know some people are going to say, well, then, they can just get away with anything they want, but you remove it from yourself. You remove that barrier from yourself, that when you realize, um, everyone, you can sit with anyone and have an equally good time, or, you know, learn something from them or endeavor to do your best in that situation, that other people are going to extend that graciousness towards you, and that because of your pattern of thinking and the way that it makes you feel, then you're going to start to sync up with more and I mean like friends, co-workers, all of it. You'll just start to sync up more and more and more with people who are also giving to you, generous towards you, kinder towards you. And then you never know, one of those days you might get invited to a book club that's like all girls, and you go and someone has a brother or a cousin or a friend, and boom, that's it. Like you met that person, you know? So give it a try. In the second video, we could do some more thinking and perhaps some exercises. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and just have fun and take it easy and be kinder to yourself. Something that I've realized, like I've always known women were amazing, but I've met some really interesting people this year. And I remember turning to a friend of mine and going, do you know what's so weird? I feel that it was a group of men, you know, like ranging from like 20s to 40s in age. And I just said, the funny thing is, there's they're not that bad. Like nothing's actually wrong with them. I feel that they're really hard on themselves, that they're very like insecure. And I just think I don't know why. Like they could probably enchant any lady and make her their wife. I just feel that there's so much hyper intellectualizing and ego in this game of like love and dating that I just think is so sick, and it doesn't need to be there. And we're clearly like a very damaged generation that we get like nervous sweats at the idea of getting brunch with somebody or whatever, having like a fun date idea. That this neuroses didn't exist when I was growing up. So I feel for everyone, honestly. But yeah, I just hope that we can like take it back to basics and have a good time and just be gentle with ourselves and not place so much value in those things that don't really matter. So yes, obviously if you want like love so that you can have fun and live your life to the best, start now. You start from removing that spiritual and mental debris, which is that self-judgment and self-shame. And we will do a series on shame. I know people have been asking me for about a year. Now that I'm done my exams, I will have more time over Christmas, so just bear with me. But thank you for being here, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you for the next one. Okay, love you, bye.